Well, some tit-for-tat has been going on over the question of Taiwan between China and the United States. How have relations been going on overall during the past several weeks? Since the beginning of 2024, officials across different sectors, including military, public security, commerce, and climate, have been engaging with each other. And China's project to invite 50,000 young American students to China over the next 5 years seem to have been set in motion. Do these developments signify a tentatively positive trend? What is the biggest obstacle, though, for going forward? I spoke with Susan Thornton, former acting assistant secretary for East Asia and Pacific Affairs of the U.S. State Department. She is now senior fellow at Yale Law School's Paul Tsai China Center. I started by asking her for her perspective on Naro's decision to sever so-called diplomatic ties with Taiwan right after the latest elections on the island.
Well, I think in each case, the calculation is probably a bit different. But certainly, as I mentioned, with China's accruing kind of weight in all aspects, economic, political, diplomatic, et cetera, there does seem to probably on the part of these countries feel like there's a certain amount of inevitability in terms of this choice. I mean, countries have a mix of interests that they have to consider. A lot of these countries have been longstanding diplomatic partners of Taiwan, but, it may be that their interest set is changing, or they may see the international environment changing. So I hope that, that it won't be because of a bidding war that these switches take place, but because of a serious consideration of national interests on the part of these countries.
Let's come back to the elections on the island. In December last year, you said that the upcoming elections in the island and the upcoming elections in the United States in November will test whether policymakers in Washington and Beijing are able to aptly or reasonably handle their relationship in 2024. Now that we're past the first test, let's say, do you think the two sides, Washington and Beijing, handle this episode reasonably, wisely?
Well, I have to say that I was, fairly pleasantly surprised by the way that the election result was handled on all sides. And I think this is a testament to the careful work that was done in the second half of last year, and particularly by our two leaders, President Biden and President Xi Jinping, when they met in San Francisco. I think there was a decision there and a determination there to make sure that we could keep our relations more or less stable during the ensuing year, including through this election period in Taiwan.
You have said that the U.S. is, if I'm wrong, please correct me, and I quote, that the U.S. is now using Taiwan as a cudgel in the deteriorating China-U.S. relations, and this is extremely dangerous for Taiwan, especially, and for China and the U.S. and the rest of the world. Do you still see it that way, and why, if you do?
Well, I think there are people in the United States who would like to use Taiwan, to push against China and to, make China on its defensive, put it back on its heels. I think that the recent efforts to sort of make sure that we have greater understanding around this issue between the U.S. administration and officials in Beijing is going to be helpful in trying to sort of temper those voices who are wanting to use Taiwan in that kind of a direction. And I think the Taiwan authorities are also sensitive to this, kind of possibility. And I think, we saw the events, 2 years ago with the trip by Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan, the sort of crisis atmosphere that generated and how negative that was on basically all fronts. And so I think that kind of move is probably going to be tempered a bit more in this current coming year.
Well, one of the most thorny issues, as I mentioned, is between the commerce authorities between the two sides. U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo has said the U.S. is denying the whole country of China instead of any particular company, the whole country, the access to the most advanced AI chips because of growing threats to the U.S. national security. And meanwhile, the U.S. is trying to run faster. And, in one of the exchanges that you mentioned, China's Minister of Commerce actually phoned, that's on January the 11th, just days ago, phoned his U.S. counterpart and lodged grave representations with the U.S. side over the export restrictions and suppression of Chinese businesses. How do you see the severity of differences in this side? Can they just keep calling each other and, lodging strong representations and protesting against each other? Do you see any potential ways that this issue can be resolved, or at least a framework to resolve such sensitive issues?
Well, this is going to be a very touchy issue this year because of the political environment in the U.S. around things like trade, things like the competition in the economic space with China. But I do think that the commerce level working groups who are talking about export controls, who are talking about trade issues, investment issues, will be able to at least explain and to maybe delve into what are some of the second and third order negative effects of these moves that people had not anticipated, and maybe try to work out some, practical kinds of accommodations or workarounds for certain things. I mean, we saw, for example, around the San Francisco meeting, an agreement to lift sanctions on the Public Security Bureau forensic lab in exchange for working together on the fentanyl issue. And so I think, when we get together and have talks and really figure out what the issues are, then we can work to somehow resolve a lot of these irritations. I mean, certainly the issues around technology competition are probably not going to go away, but I think they will be, and my hope is as we talk about these issues and learn more about what the impacts are, that we can try to find ways to tailor or narrow kind of the targeting and make it more sort of rational or explainable to the other side.
Finally, it seems to be a warmer period of time, or less cold phase, let's say, in bilateral ties, and people are seeing some lights of hope. We're seeing young people visiting China, right? Young students visiting China. You are at this moment in China as part of a exchange program, but this has been a very difficult period of time. A lot of people were seriously concerned about the future of bilateral ties between the biggest two economies in the world. But you never seem to give up, and you persevered even despite the very strong political pressure you may have faced in the United States. Why were you able to sustain and say, I'm going to keep calling for engagement with China, even despite our differences over the past few years?
Well, that's a good question. I think I'm fairly stubborn. And so I think I feel like there is no other option, that the right thing to do is for the United States and China to have continued channels of communication and exchanges, that neither one of us are going anywhere. We have to coexist, and not only coexist, but actually figure out how we're going to co-progress. And I think, in order to do that, you can't do it without understanding where the Chinese side is coming from, and without talking to counterparts. I mean, a lot of people in the United States who have problems with the relationship with China don't really know much about China, and don't really make an effort to know much about China. And I just think that's irresponsible. So my continued mission has been to try to explain how things really are in China, and to make sure that we keep lines of communication open so that we're understanding each other at least.
But just out of my curiosity, because I'm trying to do exactly the same, what is the single biggest obstacle that you can put your finger on for the domestic audience in the United States in doing what you're trying to do?
I think it's fear. I think people have become afraid in both countries, frankly, about their own futures, about their own kind of situation in their own country. They have sort of, maybe it's the pandemic, maybe it's the increased sort of competitive, kind of environment in the world, but people have become less confident and more afraid. And I think that in and of itself is enough to sort of make people look around to see if there's someone else out there that they can attribute this to. And I think we just have to get our confidence back. I think that China is facing a lot of these same issues that we see in other countries as well. I feel there's a real loss of kind of confidence in a lot of places in the world, and that we need to sort of get back to a positive vision and positive cooperation and working on problems and showing that we can solve them. That will help.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. And bravo and bon courage, as they would say, good courage.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
very much, Susan Thornton. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.